A tiny clay doll was pulled from the earth over 300 feet down. This is the Nampa Figurine, and its discovery in an Idaho well in 1889 created a mystery that has never been solved. The layer of earth that held it is geologically ancient, suggesting an age that defies everything we think we know about human history in the Americas. This artifact is a profound anomaly, a piece of evidence so controversial it has been pushed to the fringes of archaeology. By the end of this exploration, you will have all the evidence to decide for yourself if our human timeline is missing a deep and forgotten chapter. We will examine how it was found, why experts fought over it, and what its existence could mean if it is genuine. How do you react when a single discovery threatens to rewrite the story we all think we know? The story of this artifact begins with a practical task on a dusty plain in Idaho. In the year 1889, the Oregon Short Line Railroad was expanding its reach, and the new settlement of Nampa needed a reliable water source. A crew began drilling an artesian well, a process that involved driving a pipe deep into the earth until it struck a pressurized aquifer. The rhythmic pounding of the drill bit sent vibrations through the ground, piercing layer after layer of ancient soil and rock. The crew worked for days, reaching a staggering reported depth of over 300 feet. Finally, their efforts were rewarded as water began to surge upward. But the pump brought more than just water to the surface. It also brought up a dense, sticky layer of blue clay from deep within the borehole. As the workers cleared this material, something small and unusual tumbled out. It was a tiny human figure, no bigger than a person's thumb, perfectly formed from the same clay that had encased it. This was not an object lying loosely on the ground. It had been extracted from a deep, sealed geological layer, a stratum of earth that had been untouched and undisturbed for an immense span of time. Geologists who later examined the site identified this layer as part of the Glenns Ferry Formation, a deposit laid down near the boundary of the Pliocene and Pleistocene epochs. This places its formation in a period of deep time, long before any conventional timeline allows for human presence in the Americas. The figurine's journey began not in the hands of an archaeologist, but in the palm of a railroad worker, pulled from a darkness that was supposed to be empty of any human artistry. The tiny clay figure was an immediate curiosity among the workmen. Passed from hand to hand, it was examined with a mix of amusement and puzzlement. How could such a delicate, man-made object come from such a profound depth? Word of the strange find quickly spread through the small town of Nampa, sparking local speculation and stories. Yet it was the arrival of one particular man that would transform this oddity into a full-blown scientific controversy. That man was George Frederick Wright, a highly respected professor of geology at Oberlin College and a former state geologist. Wright was not a fringe theorist, he was a mainstream scientist with impeccable credentials. When he first heard of the Nampa Figurine, his reaction was one of profound doubt. The idea that a human artifact could be found in strata that old was, to his trained mind, simply impossible. It contradicted the established geological and archaeological understanding of his time. He assumed it must be a hoax, perhaps a child's toy dropped down the well shaft or a later intrusion that had been mistakenly associated with the deep clay. Determined to debunk it, he launched a thorough investigation. He traveled to Nampa, interviewed the workman himself, and meticulously examined the drilling records and the geology of the borehole. He studied the figurine in detail, noting how it was made of the same distinctive blue clay from the deep layer, and how that clay was firmly packed into its crevices. This was not an object that had been recently dropped, it was something that had been embedded. After his exhaustive analysis, George Frederick Wright's skepticism shattered. The evidence, as he saw it, was overwhelming and unambiguous. He became convinced the artifact was genuine. In his professional opinion, the Nampa figurine had indeed been brought up from that ancient clay stratum, hundreds of feet below the surface, sealed in a geological context that spoke of immense antiquity. His conclusion, published in scientific journals, sent a shockwave through his field. Here was a pillar of the establishment stating that the human story in America might be far, far older than anyone had dared to believe. The object at the heart of this storm is disarmingly simple. Today, you can see it for yourself at the Idaho State Historical Museum. It is a small, fired clay figure, roughly 1.5 inches long, about the length of a person's thumb from the knuckle to the tip. It fits perfectly in the palm of your hand. The form is undeniably humanoid, with a rounded head, a defined torso, and 2 arms that curve gently down to meet 2 simple legs. There are no intricate facial features carved into the clay, no detailed clothing or tools held in its hands. Its artistry lies in its basic, almost primal, representation of the human form. This very simplicity is what makes it so compelling and so difficult to dismiss. It does not look like a modern forgery trying to impress with complexity. It looks ancient. The clay itself has a worn, earthy patina, and it is composed of the same material as the deep blue clay layer from which it was reportedly extracted. This is not a gleaming statue of a king or a warrior. It is something far more humble. It resembles the kind of small votive object or personal talisman found in cultures worldwide, an item meant to signify presence, belief, or perhaps a simple offering. Holding this tangible, physical object in your mind's eye changes the entire debate. This is not just a theoretical idea or a strange story. It is a real thing that exists. Its quiet, unadorned presence asks a silent but deafening question. If it is genuine, what hands shaped this clay in an era we have been told was empty of human life in this part of the world? The artifact waits, a small sentinel from the deep past, holding its secret in its simple, silent form. The accepted age of the layer that held this figurine is what makes its existence so startling. Geologists identified the material as coming from the Glenns Ferry Formation, a thick deposit of sediment laid down by ancient lakes and rivers in what is now the Snake River Plain. Based on established dating methods and the fossil record within it, this formation is assigned an age of approximately 2 million years. To grasp what that number truly means, we need to step back into the deep time of our planet. 2 million years ago places us firmly in the late Pliocene epoch. The world then was profoundly different. The continents were in roughly their modern positions, but the climate was warmer, and the flora and fauna were a mix of the familiar and the strange. This was an era dominated by magnificent, now extinct creatures like giant ground sloths and saber-toothed cats. Crucially, in the entire scientific narrative of human evolution, this period predates the emergence of our own genus Homo. The most advanced primates on Earth at that time were likely Australopithecus, small-brained, bipedal ancestors who lived in Africa and whose toolkit consisted of simple, unshaped stones. The idea of any hominid, let alone a modern human, being in North America at this time is not just unlikely, it is considered an absolute impossibility. The first major wave of human migration into the Americas, according to all mainstream models, occurred only within the last 20 to 30,000 years. This creates the stark, inescapable contradiction at the core of the Nampa mystery. We have a clearly human-made object, a fired clay figurine, reportedly sealed within a geological layer that is over 1 million years older than the very first humans who should have been capable of creating it. It is an artifact that appears not just early, but impossibly early, a single piece of evidence that stands alone against the entire timeline of human history on this continent. If the figurine is authentic, then our story is missing a chapter of unimaginable depth. Professor Wright knew his endorsement would ignite a firestorm. He understood that to be taken seriously, he had to dismantle every possible argument for a hoax with the meticulous care of a courtroom lawyer. His defense was built on 4 pillars of evidence, each one aimed at a different line of skepticism. First, he addressed the well itself. The borehole was narrow, just 6 inches in diameter, and the drilling process was violent and continuous. The idea that someone could have dropped the figurine down that deep, dark shaft and have it settle perfectly into the exact layer of blue clay being brought up by the pump was, in his view, a physical absurdity. It would have been smashed or lost. Second, he investigated the workmen. These were not antiquities dealers or pranksters. They were railroad laborers focused on a difficult job. They had no knowledge of deep-time geology, no motive to fabricate a find that would only complicate their work, and their consistent, earnest testimony convinced him they were reporting exactly what happened. Third was the question of motive. What would be the point? There was no fame or fortune to be gained from a small clay doll in 1889 Idaho. No one stood to profit from such a bizarre claim. Finally, and most decisively for Wright, was the physical state of the object itself. The figurine's surface was heavily mineralized, coated with iron oxide molecules that had precipitated onto it over a long period. This coating was identical to the patina found on other objects from that deep clay layer. The blue clay was packed into its every crevice, evidence it had been fully embedded, not merely resting on a surface. Convinced by this chain of evidence, Wright did what a reputable scientist must do. He published his findings. He brought the Nampa figurine to the attention of the academic world through papers in prominent journals like the American Antiquarian and the Proceedings of the Boston Society of Natural History. He was not whispering to fringe groups. He was presenting a case to his peers in their own halls of scholarship. In doing so, he transformed the artifact from a local oddity into a legitimate scientific problem, a puzzle piece that refused to fit the established picture no matter how hard the mainstream tried to force it. Despite Wright's impeccable credentials and careful argument, his conclusions met a wall of polite but firm dismissal. The scientific establishment of his day had a framework for understanding human history, and the Nampa figurine did not fit within it. This was not necessarily a matter of closed-mindedness, but one of paradigm protection. The dominant theory in the late 19th century, championed by influential institutions, held that humans had only arrived in the Americas a few thousand years ago. This timeline was comfortably aligned with biblical chronologies and the limited archaeological evidence then accepted. A 2-million-year-old artifact from Idaho was not just an outlier, it was a direct assault on the entire intellectual structure. To accept it would require dismantling decades of accepted research and rebuilding human history from the ground up. For most scholars, it was far simpler and more logical to assume the artifact must have somehow slipped into that ancient layer through some unexplained modern disturbance. The figurine was labeled an anomaly, a curiosity, and quietly set aside. The weight of consensus proved heavier than the weight of a single piece of evidence, no matter how compelling its defender. This consensus began to shift, but not in a way that helped the Nampa figurine's case. In the 1920s, a series of dramatic discoveries at a site called Folsom, New Mexico, finally broke the old paradigm. Archaeologists found elegantly crafted stone spear points, now known as Folsom points, embedded in the ribs of an extinct species of bison. This was irrefutable proof that humans had been in North America for far longer than previously believed, coexisting with Ice Age megafauna. The new timeline that emerged placed human arrival around the end of the last Ice Age, roughly 13,000 years ago. This was a revolutionary leap in antiquity, but it was a leap that the scientific community could absorb and validate. It pushed the human story back by thousands of years, not by millions. The Folsom discovery provided a new, evidence-based foundation, and it created a powerful new orthodoxy. Within this new framework, the Nampa figurine became even more of an impossible object. If the oldest accepted human presence was 13,000 years old, then an artifact allegedly 2 million years old was not just an outlier, it was a scientific absurdity. It was now dismissed not only by the old guard but by the new wave of archaeologists as well. the figurine was relegated to the category of unexplained oddities, a presumed hoax that was no longer worth serious investigation because its claimed age was so fantastically beyond the bounds of the possible. The very success that expanded our view of the past ended up solidifying the walls that kept this particular mystery locked away. Yet a 2-million-year-old artifact demands extraordinary proof, and the most common and logical rebuttal is simple: it must be a hoax. This is the default position of mainstream archaeology, a necessary skepticism when faced with such a staggering claim. The hoax hypothesis offers several plausible scenarios. Perhaps a board worker, a child of a settler, or a local resident dropped a small clay doll into the open borehole. Maybe it was a practical joke intended to confuse the drillers or create a local legend. Given the era, it is not hard to imagine someone carving a simple figure from local clay, firing it in a campfire, and secretly introducing it into the worksite. This explanation is clean, it is simple, and it keeps the established human timeline comfortably intact. It requires no rewriting of textbooks, no acceptance of impossible antiquity. For most researchers, this is by far the most reasonable conclusion. But when we examine the mechanics of this supposed hoax, complications arise. The drilling operation used a device called a sand pump, a tube with a valve at the bottom that was pounded into the earth to collect material. The borehole itself was only about 6 inches wide. For the figurine to be planted and then recovered as evidence, it would have needed to fall hundreds of feet down this narrow, dark shaft and land precisely in the sand pump's valve as it collected a sample of the deep blue clay. The violent, percussive action of the drill would have likely shattered a small, baked clay object long before it reached the necessary depth. Furthermore, the workers reported that the figurine came up encased in a solid ball of that blue clay, with the material packed into its microscopic pores. This suggests it was not a loose item that fell in recently, but an object that had been embedded within that geological layer for a very long time, allowing for mineralization and deep adhesion. Then there is the question of motive and consequence. No one ever came forward to claim the prank. No one bragged about fooling a famous geologist. In the decades that followed, no evidence surfaced of a local artisan producing similar figures, nor did any witness statements emerge to suggest a conspiracy. The workers had nothing to gain and their jobs to lose by fabricating such a disruptive find, so we are left with a puzzle. The hoax theory is the simplest explanation, but its execution seems mechanically difficult and motivationally empty. It remains the official stance because the alternative is so revolutionary, yet the questions it leaves unanswered continue to give the tiny figurine its enduring, mysterious weight. To understand why a simple hoax seems so mechanically improbable, we must look closely at the tool that brought the figurine to light. The crew was not using a simple shovel or a bucket on a rope. They were operating a device called a sand pump, a piece of engineering designed for one very specific task: to extract undisturbed samples from precise depths. Here is how it worked. A heavy iron pipe about 6 inches in diameter was hammered straight down into the earth with tremendous force. At the bottom of this pipe was a clever one-way valve. As the pipe was driven deeper, the valve would open, allowing the dense, sticky blue clay to be forced up into the tube by the pressure. Once the pipe was lifted, the valve snapped shut, trapping that exact plug of material inside. This sealed column of earth was then brought to the surface intact, a pristine core sample from hundreds of feet below. The tiny Nampa figurine was not found lying loosely in the mud at the wellhead. The workers reported it came up embedded in one of these solid, sausage-like cylinders of deep blue clay. This single technical detail changes everything. For the figurine to be a modern object that simply fell in, it would have had to defy physics in a series of unlikely steps. First, someone would have had to drop it down the narrow 300-foot shaft. As it fell, it would have bounced violently against the hard iron walls of the casing pipe, a journey almost certain to shatter a small baked clay doll. But let us say, miraculously, it survived the fall. It would then have to land precisely at the very bottom of the hole, directly where the sand pump's valve would later open. Then, during the violent, percussive driving of the next pipe segment, it would need to be forced up into that valve without being crushed and become perfectly encased within a new plug of clay as the valve sealed. The odds of all these events aligning by random chance are astronomically small. The sand pump was not a passive hole, it was an active, destructive sampler. It did not collect loose debris from the walls of the shaft. It cut and captured a specific, sealed segment of the geological column. This mechanism makes the idea of a surface object accidentally migrating down and blending with the deep sample highly problematic. It suggests that if the figurine was in that clay plug, it was most likely already part of that deep, ancient layer when the pump's valve sliced through it. This technical reality does not prove the artifact's age, but it does make the simplest hoax explanation far more complicated than it first appears. This leaves us with one other possibility, that the figurine is not an artifact at all, but a trick of nature. Could a simple lump of clay, tumbled and weathered over eons, naturally take on a shape that so perfectly mimics the human form? The human mind is famously wired to see patterns, especially faces and figures, in random shapes, a phenomenon called pareidolia. We see a man in the moon, a face in the clouds, or a dragon in a mountain ridge. It is a compelling idea. Perhaps what the workers pulled from the well was just an oddly shaped stone, a geological coincidence that our pattern-seeking brains interpreted as something man-made. This explanation offers a clean escape from the entire controversy, turning a world-altering artifact back into a simple curiosity of the natural world. Yet when we look closely at the Nampa figurine itself, this theory begins to crumble. The object is not a vague, suggestive shape. It possesses specific, deliberate features that are extremely difficult to attribute to random geological processes. Examiners, including Professor Wright and later researchers, noted the clear symmetry of its form, a balanced left and right side that speaks of intentional design. More strikingly, they reported distinct impressions on its surface that resembled human fingernail marks, subtle indentations that could have been made by a fingertip pressing and shaping the soft clay before it was fired. Natural erosion does not create symmetrical, bilaterally balanced figures with fine surface details that mimic tool marks. Water wear and mineral deposits tend to create smoothed, rounded, asymmetrical forms, not something with a defined head, torso, two arms, and two legs in proportional arrangement. While pareidolia is a powerful force, it typically works on ambiguous shapes, allowing our imagination to fill in the blanks. The Nampa figurine presents too many specific, organized details to be comfortably dismissed as a random formation. It crosses a threshold from looking vaguely humanoid to appearing intentionally crafted, so we are left with two improbable choices. Either this is an astonishingly perfect natural simulacrum, a one-in-a-billion geological fluke that fooled experienced geologists, or it is exactly what it appears to be, a human-made object from an impossible time. The weight of its studied characteristics leans heavily toward the latter, pushing us back toward that unsettling, revolutionary conclusion. So the Nampa figurine did not vanish, it was simply filed away. As the 20th century progressed, the artifact's journey was one of quiet exile from the mainstream of science. You would no longer find it discussed in textbooks on North American prehistory. Instead, its home became a different kind of book, the volumes dedicated to archaeological anomalies, unsolved mysteries, or what some call forbidden archaeology. In these pages, it sat alongside other perplexing finds, objects that seemed out of place and out of time, collectively labeled as OOP arts, out-of-place artifacts. It became a piece of trivia for those fascinated by the edges of history, a curious story but not one considered part of the real work of understanding the past. This shift from contested evidence to fringe curiosity was not accidental. It was a direct result of a powerful new consensus that solidified in American archaeology. By the mid-1950s, a theory known as Clovis first had become the unchallenged paradigm. This model stated that the first humans to enter the Americas were the Clovis people, big game hunters with their distinctive fluted spear points, who crossed the Bering Land Bridge from Siberia around 13,000 years ago. This was a clean, elegant, and evidence-supported story. It provided a clear starting point for the human history of two continents. The Clovis first model was a tremendous success. It organized decades of research into a coherent narrative. But like any powerful idea, it also created boundaries. For a professional archaeologist, challenging Clovis first was not merely a scholarly disagreement, it could be career suicide. To suggest human presence was significantly older was to risk being labeled a pseudoscientist, someone who did not understand the rigorous standards of the field. In this environment, evidence that contradicted the paradigm was not examined with fresh eyes. It was explained away or, more often, ignored. Anomalies like the Nampa figurine were professionally dangerous. They were what researchers call problematic data, information that does not fit the accepted model. The standard practice with problematic data is not to rebuild the model, but to set the data aside until it can be explained within the existing framework. Since the Nampa figurine could never fit within Clovis first, it was set aside permanently. It was buried not in blue clay, but in a category of institutional disregard, a footnote deemed too impossible to be taken seriously. The artifact itself rested in a museum drawer, but its meaning was entombed by the very success of the story that was supposed to explain our past. Yet the walls of academic consensus are never completely sealed. Decades after the Nampa figurine was set aside, a new kind of researcher began to examine the dusty shelves of forgotten evidence. In the early 1990s, two authors, Michael Cremo and Richard Thompson, published a monumental and controversial work titled Forbidden Archaeology. This massive volume undertook a staggering task to compile hundreds of ignored and rejected archaeological discoveries from around the world that seemed to suggest a human history stretching back millions of years. For Cremo and Thompson, the Nampa figurine was not an isolated oddity. It was a key piece of evidence in a much larger pattern of suppression. They meticulously reprinted the original reports from George Frederick Wright and others, presenting the figurine's case with all its original documentation and geological arguments. Their work did not aim to debate within the existing paradigm. It sought to dismantle it entirely, proposing that modern humans, or beings very much like us, have existed on Earth for a vastly longer timeline than science admits. The book argued that such evidence is routinely filtered out, not because it is false, but because it is too disruptive to the established story. This framing placed the Nampa figurine at the heart of a profound and contentious debate, no longer just about a single artifact, but about the very processes of knowledge itself. How does science decide what is real? Is it a pure pursuit of truth, or is it a social institution that protects its core beliefs by marginalizing inconvenient data? By reintroducing the figurine to a new generation, Cremo and Thompson transformed it from a museum curiosity into a symbol of a radical challenge. They gave it a narrative, one of a lost human past and a modern scientific establishment unwilling to look at the evidence. This reignited public fascination, but it also cemented the artifact's status as a dividing line. To mainstream scholars, it was now tainted by association with fringe theories. To alternative researchers and a curious public, it became a powerful emblem of a hidden history waiting to be acknowledged. The figurine was no longer just an object, it was a statement. The strongest pillar supporting the figurine's impossible age is its reported geological context. To truly judge its validity, we must re-examine that context with a modern, critical eye, questioning not just the artifact but the very ground it came from. Could there be a simpler, more conventional explanation for how a human-made object ended up hundreds of feet down? The most common geological rebuttal involves the concept of intrusion. Perhaps the figurine did not originate in that ancient blue clay, but fell into a much younger feature that penetrated it. Imagine a deep crack, a fissure in the earth caused by an earthquake, or the complex tunnel of a prehistoric rodent burrow. Over centuries, surface water and shifting soil could carry a small object down through such a passageway, depositing it into an older layer below. This process, known as vertical displacement, is a well-documented phenomenon in archaeology. It is how modern coins sometimes end up in ancient ruins, not by time travel, but by the slow, relentless churn of the earth. If such a feature existed at the Nampa site, it would provide a perfect natural elevator, transporting the figurine from a recent, plausible time period down into a geologically ancient one, creating the illusion of immense age. This is the scientific counter-argument that could neatly resolve the entire mystery without rewriting history. It is logical, it is based on known processes, and it protects the established timeline. But to accept it, we must carefully weigh it against the specific observations made at the well in 1889. The workers and the initial geologists, including Professor Wright, described the blue clay layer as remarkably homogeneous and undisturbed. They reported that the figurine was brought up encased in a solid, cohesive plug of this material from a specific depth. A rodent burrow or a major fissure would typically leave telltale signs, a mixing of different colored soils, inclusions of gravel or organic matter from upper layers, or a collapsed structure visible in the surrounding clay. The sand pump, by capturing a sealed core, should have revealed such disturbances. Wright and his contemporaries, trained in geology, were looking for exactly these signs of modern intrusion. Their professional assessment was that no such pathway existed, that the clay stratum was intact and the object was indigenous to it. This presents us with a classic conflict between a known geological process and a specific, on-the-ground observation. Either the initial investigators missed a subtle feature, which is entirely possible, or the stratum was indeed as sealed and pristine as they claimed. The truth hinges on the quality of that original observation, a moment in a muddy worksite over a century ago that we can never perfectly reconstruct. This leaves the geological door slightly ajar. The possibility of an undetected natural shaft cannot be entirely ruled out, offering a narrow but legitimate escape route from the figurine's most shocking implication. Yet that escape requires us to dismiss the consistent testimony of the men who were there, who handled the clay, and who saw no evidence of a breach in the deep, silent blue layer. The Nampa figurine is not alone in its defiance of time. It belongs to a small, strange family of discoveries that archaeologists call out-of-place artifacts. Each one tells a similar, bewildering story. Take the London hammer, for instance. In the 1930s, a family in Texas found what appeared to be an ordinary hammerhead embedded in a solid lump of rock that dated to the Cretaceous period, the age of the dinosaurs. The wooden handle had even partially turned to coal. Then there is the Aod wedge, a wedge-shaped aluminum object discovered in Romania in the 1970s, buried under 35 feet of sand and gravel alongside the bones of a mastodon, an animal that vanished thousands of years before modern aluminum production began. These objects and others like them share a common, impossible signature. They are clearly shaped by human intelligence, yet they are found locked within geological layers that are millions of years old, layers that should contain only fossils and minerals, never the work of human hands. They are like messages from a sender who cannot possibly exist, arriving in envelopes stamped with the wrong date by eons. This pattern forces a difficult question. Are these all elaborate hoaxes and misidentifications, or could they be faint, scattered clues pointing to a human presence so ancient it has been completely erased from our collective memory? The difference between them often lies not in their strangeness, but in the quality of their provenance, the documented story of their discovery. This is where the Nampa figurine stands apart. Many of these anomalous artifacts have murky origins, surfacing in private collections or reported long after the fact, making scientific verification nearly impossible. The London hammer was found by hikers, its exact geological context difficult to confirm. The Ayod wedge's discovery was not witnessed by trained geologists. The Nampa case is different because a reputable scientist, George Frederick Wright, arrived on the scene almost immediately. He questioned the workers, examined the drilling machinery, and studied the undisturbed clay samples himself. He published his methods and his doubts before arriving at his controversial conclusion. This gives the figurine a paper trail, a chain of custody that, while not perfect, is far more substantial than most objects of its kind. It transforms the artifact from a mere curiosity into a documented case study, a mystery with filed reports and professional testimony. This stronger documentation does not prove the figurine is authentic, but it does make dismissing it as a simple hoax a more complex task. It raises the stakes. If one of the best documented out-of-place artifacts could still be genuine, what does that say about the walls we have built around our understanding of deep time? To grasp the full weight of this contradiction, we must first understand the story science tells us about our own origins. The human journey, as currently mapped by fossils and genetics, is a slow, branching path that begins not in the Americas but in Africa. The first creatures we might recognize as part of our own lineage, the early hominins like Australopithecus, walked upright over 4 million years ago, but they had small brains and did not craft complex tools. The genus Homo, our own direct line, emerges much later. Homo habilis, the handyman, appears around 2.4 million years ago in Africa, known for making the first simple stone choppers. Then comes Homo erectus, a true pioneer, spreading out of Africa and into Eurasia perhaps 1.8 million years ago. These were intelligent, tool-using ancestors, but they were not us. Our own species, Homo sapiens, does not evolve until roughly 300,000 years ago, and we remain exclusively in Africa for the vast majority of our history. Our great global migration, the one that eventually populated every continent, is a very recent event. Genetic and archaeological evidence suggests modern humans only began venturing beyond Africa in significant numbers around 70 to 100,000 years ago, reaching Australia and Europe. The peopling of the Americas is the final major chapter of this epic. The most widely accepted model, supported by a wealth of evidence, places the first successful large-scale migration into the continent no earlier than around 20 to 30,000 years ago, with people moving south of the great ice sheets perhaps 16,000 years ago. Even the most radical, contested theories proposing an earlier human presence, perhaps along coastal routes 50 or even 100,000 years ago, are still operating on a scale of tens of thousands of years. Now place the Nampa figurine against this timeline. Its reported geological home is 2 million years old, 2 million. At that moment in deep time, according to every fossil we have, the most advanced human ancestor anywhere on Earth was Homo habilis in Africa, a maker of crude stone flakes. The idea of any member of the genus Homo being in Idaho, much less one skilled enough to carefully shape, fire, and imprint a small clay figurine, is not just unlikely, it shatters the narrative completely. The figurine is not merely older than expected, it exists in an epoch that, by all accounts, should be utterly silent of any human artistry in the New World. This is the staggering scale of the anomaly. It is not a matter of adjusting a date by a few centuries. It is a claim that places a sophisticated human expression in a world that, scientifically speaking, should have been populated only by giant mammals and the distant, wandering ancestors of humanity on another continent entirely. This stark contradiction forces a radical question. Could the hands that shaped the Nampa figurine belong not to modern humans, but to a different kind of hominin entirely? The most speculative theory proposed to explain the artifact suggests that perhaps a species like Homo erectus, known for its remarkable migrations out of Africa nearly 2 million years ago, accomplished a journey of unimaginable scale, reaching the Americas. Homo erectus was a resourceful and adaptable ancestor, mastering fire and crafting sophisticated stone tools like the symmetrical hand axe. Their wanderlust took them across Asia as far as the islands of Indonesia. Proponents of this idea ask if they could traverse such vast distances in the Old World. Could a lost group have ventured even further, crossing land bridges or coastlines during a period of lowered sea levels, eventually finding their way to the interior of North America? In this speculative scenario, the Nampa figurine would not be an anomaly of human history, but a rare, fragile relic of a pre-human history in the New World, a tiny echo of an intelligence that arrived millions of years before our own species ever evolved. The figurine, if genuine, becomes the sole, silent advocate for this breathtaking narrative, a single piece of pottery arguing for a forgotten epoch of hominin exploration. It is a theory that grants the artifact a home in deep time, but at a tremendous cost, the complete absence of any other proof. The evidence against this idea is not merely sparse, it is a void. No fossils of Homo erectus or any hominin have ever been discovered in geological layers of that age in the Americas. No stone tools, no campfire ashes, no butchered animal bones with cut marks have been found that would signal their presence. The journey itself presents a staggering biogeographical puzzle. While lowered sea levels could have exposed a land bridge between Asia and Alaska, the timing is misaligned by millions of years with the proposed age of the figurine. The interior route south would have been blocked by immense ice sheets or formidable mountain ranges during different climatic periods. A journey of that length and difficulty, surviving unknown predators and unfamiliar ecosystems, would likely have left a trail of archaeological evidence, however faint. Yet that trail is completely missing, so we are presented with a profound imbalance. On one side sits a single, small clay object with a controversial provenance. On the other side stands the entire fossil and archaeological record of 2 continents, which shows no sign whatsoever of any hominin presence until very recently. The theory that an ancient hominin made the figurine is an attempt to rescue it from impossibility by invoking a different, grander impossibility. It swaps one mystery for another, trading the puzzle of the artifact's origin for the even larger puzzle of a transcontinental migration that left no other trace. This leaves the figurine in a state of profound isolation, a potential clue to a story for which every other page is blank. This is how science protects its stories. The saga of the Nampa figurine is not just about an artifact, it is a perfect case study in how knowledge itself is filtered and defended. The philosopher of science Thomas Kuhn described this process in his famous work on scientific revolutions. He argued that science does not progress in a smooth, linear march toward truth. Instead, it operates within dominant frameworks called paradigms. A paradigm is the established model, the big story that everyone agrees on, like the idea that humans arrived in the Americas only at the end of the last ice age. Within a paradigm, scientists engage in what Kuhn called normal science, solving puzzles and filling in details, but always within the rules of the accepted game. The paradigm tells researchers what questions are worth asking, what tools to use, and what kinds of answers are possible. It provides stability and direction, allowing for incredible depth of research. But it also creates powerful blind spots. When an object like the Nampa figurine appears, it is not seen with neutral eyes. It is interpreted through the lens of the prevailing paradigm. Because its claimed age of 2 million years is so far outside the boundaries of the accepted human timeline, it is not treated as a new piece of the puzzle. It is labeled an anomaly, a piece of data that does not fit. And according to Kuhn's model, the first reaction of normal science is not to question the paradigm, but to protect it. Anomalies are not welcomed as opportunities for discovery. they are seen as problems to be solved, and the solution almost always involves explaining them away within the existing framework. The figurine could not be 2 million years old, therefore it must be something else, a hoax, a mistake, a natural formation. Every piece of evidence in its favor is reinterpreted to fit the comfortable, familiar story. The detailed worker testimony becomes unreliable folklore. The sand pump's mechanism is reinterpreted to allow for a modern intrusion. The mineralization on its surface is downplayed. The goal is not to follow the evidence where it leads, but to make the evidence fit back into the box. This is not necessarily a conspiracy or a sign of bad science. It is simply how human institutions, including scientific ones, maintain coherence and order. Challenging a core paradigm is a profoundly disruptive act. It threatens careers, invalidates lifetimes of work, and forces a painful re-evaluation of everything thought to be true. It is far easier and more socially rational to dismiss a single inconvenient object than to consider tearing down the entire intellectual house you have built your life within. So the figurine was not disproven, it was defined out of existence. It was placed in the category of things that cannot be and therefore are not. Its continued presence in a museum drawer is a quiet testament to this process, a physical reminder that our understanding of the past is not just a collection of facts, but a story we choose to defend, sometimes against the very evidence we have unearthed. The figurine's mystery could, in theory, be solved with tools that did not exist in 1889. Modern science possesses methods capable of interrogating the artifact's past in ways George Frederick Wright could only dream of. The most direct test would be thermoluminescence dating. This technique measures the tiny amount of natural radiation that accumulates in crystalline materials, like the minerals within fired clay, from the moment they are last heated. In essence, it can determine the last time the Nampa figurine was placed in a fire. If a test were conducted and returned an age of a few hundred years, the case would be closed, a modern creation. If it returned an age of 2 million years, it would trigger a scientific revolution. Beyond dating, high-resolution microscopic analysis could examine the thick mineral crust on its surface. Scientists could study the layers of that crust, analyzing the sequence and chemistry of the deposits to determine the environmental conditions under which they formed and for how long. They could search for microscopic pollen grains or plant fibers trapped within the clay, which could be dated independently and used to pinpoint the era when the raw material was gathered. Even the composition of the clay itself could be compared in fine detail to the specific blue clay stratum from the well site, confirming or denying its origin with geological fingerprinting. These are not speculative ideas, they are standard, reliable procedures in archaeological science today, yet they have never been applied to the Nampa figurine. The artifact rests in its museum case, physically accessible but scientifically untouched. This inaction speaks volumes about its status. For mainstream archaeology, the object is considered so definitively an anomaly, so impossible within the accepted framework, that devoting resources to testing it is seen as a waste of time and credibility. There is a profound institutional reluctance to engage with something that has been categorized as a fringe curiosity for over a century. To test it is to grant it legitimacy, to admit that its mystery is worth solving. For those who believe it might be genuine, this creates a frustrating cycle. The artifact is dismissed because it lacks scientific verification, but it cannot get that verification because it is dismissed. So the tiny figure remains in a kind of limbo, a question preserved in clay, waiting for someone with both the courage and the authority to finally ask it the right questions. The very substance of the Nampa figurine tells its own story of impossibility. It is not carved from stone or bone, materials that even our most ancient ancestors could shape with simple tools. This object is made of fired clay, a technology that represents a profound leap in human cultural development. The mastery of fire to transform soft, pliable earth into a hard, permanent ceramic is a hallmark of settled, complex societies. This process requires more than just an open flame. It demands an understanding of controlling heat, of knowing the right temperatures and durations to bake the clay without cracking it. It is a technology of patience and purpose, associated with the creation of storage vessels for grain, with ritual objects, with the beginnings of permanent art. In the conventional archaeological record, the invention of pottery marks a significant threshold, one that appears in different parts of the world at different times, but always within the last 20,000 years and often much more recently. For a 2-million-year-old artifact to be ceramic is to add a staggering layer of sophistication to an already impossible claim. It suggests not just a wandering hominin who might chip a stone tool, but a community with the knowledge to process materials, to intentionally alter the physical properties of their world through controlled pyrotechnology. This pushes the implied cultural context from simple survival into the realm of symbolic expression and settled innovation. The figurine, if taken at face value, would indicate that a society advanced enough to produce ceramics existed in Idaho at a time when, according to all other evidence, the most intelligent beings on the planet were only just beginning to consistently shape the sharp edges of stones. The material itself becomes a witness against its own age, a quiet but powerful testament that what we hold in our hands could not possibly be from the epoch it claims. This silent testimony from the clay asks us to consider which is more likely, that our entire understanding of human technological evolution is missing a chapter of immense duration and sophistication, or that this small, baked figure found its way into the ancient earth through a series of mistakes and misjudgments. The answer seems obvious, yet the artifact remains a fired question that refuses to crumble. But what if the land itself remembers a different story? Beyond the drilling logs and the geological reports, the region around Nampa holds another kind of record, one written not in stone but in memory. For millennia, the indigenous peoples of the plateau, including the Shoshone and Bannock tribes, have lived in this landscape, passing down oral histories through generations. These stories are not literal history books, but they are profound repositories of cultural memory, often encoding events, observations, and understandings of the world in symbolic and narrative form. When faced with an artifact that seems impossibly ancient, it is natural to wonder if any threads of these traditions could hint at a deep past that aligns, even metaphorically, with the figurine's mystery. Are there legends of ancient peoples or of beings who were here long before the current tribes? Some traditions across North America do speak of the little people, spirit beings often described as small in stature, mischievous, powerful, and sometimes associated with remote places like mountains, forests, or springs. These figures are deeply embedded in the spiritual and mythological frameworks of many cultures. In the context of the Nampa figurine, which is only about 1.5 inches tall, a speculative connection might be drawn. Could a tiny, human-like clay object, if ever encountered by ancestors in the distant past, have inspired or reinforced stories of such small beings? It is a fascinating thematic echo, a whisper of a possibility that the form of the artifact resonates with a recurring motif in native storytelling. However, this is where we must tread with great care and respect. Drawing a direct line between a specific, contested archaeological find and the sacred oral traditions of living cultures is not only methodologically unsound, it risks appropriating and distorting those traditions to serve an external narrative. There is no Shoshone or Bannock legend that speaks of a clay doll pulled from a deep well by railroad men. The little people are spiritual entities, not a literal description of a lost race of miniature humans. To suggest otherwise would be to misunderstand and diminish the rich complexity of these cultural teachings. So, while no evidential link exists, the exploration opens a different kind of door. It reminds us that human curiosity about our own origins, about who walked this earth before us, is a universal impulse. It manifests in our scientific digging and in our sacred stories. The Nampa figurine, sitting silently between these two worlds, the empirical and the mythological, becomes a symbol of that deep desire to connect with a past that feels just beyond our reach. It represents the haunting idea of a lost chapter, a forgotten people whose only trace might be a story transformed by time or a single, fragile artifact waiting in the dark. That tiny, silent figure from the deep earth holds a second mystery within the first. If we accept for a moment its impossible age as genuine, we are left with a profound question. What was it for? Its crude simplicity makes it difficult to place into a neat category, yet its very form suggests an intention beyond mere utility. This was not a tool for cutting or scraping. It is a representation, a deliberate shaping of clay into a likeness of something, likely a human form. That act alone speaks volumes. It implies a mind capable of symbolic thought, of seeing a lump of earth and envisioning something else within it, then bringing that vision into being. In that simple act of creation, we cross a threshold from pure survival into the realm of meaning. Perhaps it was a child's toy, a small companion shaped by a parent's hands from the riverbank clay and hardened in the embers of a fire. This is a deeply human image connecting us across any imagined gulf of time, the universal impulse to create something for a child. Alternatively, it might have been a votive offering, a humble gift left at a sacred spring or buried in the earth as an act of gratitude, a plea, or a connection to forces greater than oneself. Its small size and lack of ornate detail could support this, a personal token of belief rather than a public monument. It could also represent an early artistic expression, a first attempt to capture the self in a permanent medium, a statement that simply says, "We are here." Each of these possibilities, from toy to offering to art, points toward a complex inner world. They suggest relationships between parent and child, between an individual and the cosmos, between the maker and their own identity. For such an object to exist at a date of 2 million years would mean that these facets of the human experience, nurturing, spirituality, self-awareness, are not recent developments but ancient foundational threads in our story. The figurine's quiet form challenges not just our timeline but our assumptions about when the spark of culture first ignited. It proposes that long before grand temples or written language, the essential human qualities of care, wonder, and creativity might have already taken shape, expressed in something as fragile as a pinch of clay, fired and forgotten, waiting in the dark for an age that would struggle to believe it. The Nampa figurine endures because it is a perfect historical stalemate. On one side, the argument for a hoax rests on the bedrock of sheer improbability. An object that seems to be 2 million years old, made with a technology that should not exist for another 1.5 million years, found in a place where no human should have been, defies every established fact we have. The simplest explanation is almost always the right one, and here the simplest explanation is that someone at some point placed a modern object into that well. This logic is powerful, clean, and preserves our entire understanding of human history. It requires no intellectual upheaval. Yet, on the other side of this divide stands the meticulous work of George Frederick Wright and the stubborn physical reality of the sand pump. Wright was not a gullible amateur. He was a skeptic who went to Nampa to debunk the story and came away convinced. His investigation focused on the very questions a hoax would raise, and he found the answers unsatisfying. The mechanics of the sand pump make a casual planting seem physically difficult, if not impossible, for a small, fragile clay doll to survive. The artifact's deep encasement in a specific, homogeneous clay plug argues against a simple drop down a hole. So we are left with two opposing forces, each with its own compelling weight. The improbability of the artifact's age pushes us toward dismissing it. The quality of the initial investigation and the peculiarities of its recovery pull us back toward taking it seriously. This is why the mystery cannot be laid to rest. For the skeptic, the hoax theory has unanswered questions about method and motive. For the proponent, the artifact's validation requires overturning mountains of contrary evidence. Neither side can deliver a knockout blow without applying modern scientific tests like thermoluminescence dating. The figurine remains frozen in this debate, a piece of evidence that is too problematic to accept and too well documented to simply ignore. It satisfies no one completely, and that is precisely what makes it so endlessly fascinating. It is a puzzle with pieces that refuse to fit together, a question mark etched in clay that continues to whisper from the depths of time, challenging us to wonder what story we have not yet been brave enough to hear. The implications of accepting this tiny artifact would ripple outwards like a shockwave, touching every chapter of the human story we think we know. Its authenticity would not be a minor footnote, but a fundamental challenge, forcing us to rewrite not just a single page of history, but the entire volume. First and foremost, the timeline of human presence in the Americas would shatter. The carefully constructed narrative of a migration across the Bering Land Bridge at the end of the last ice age would become merely the most recent arrival, a final overlay on a continent that might have been home to intelligent beings for millions of years. The figurine would suggest that human history in the New World is not a story of tens of thousands of years, but of epochs, a deep and forgotten saga completely lost to time. This single object would also revolutionize our understanding of human technological and cultural development. A fired clay figurine from 2 million years ago places the mastery of pyrotechnology and symbolic art in an era we currently associate with the most basic stone tools. It would mean that the spark of complex culture, the desire to create, to represent, to perhaps venerate or play, ignited far earlier and in far more places than we ever suspected. The slow, linear progression from simple choppers to hand axes to art, a timeline centered in Africa and Eurasia, would suddenly have a parallel, advanced thread running in distant Idaho. This suggests that the capacity for innovation and symbolic thought might be an inherent, ancient potential within our lineage, waiting to be expressed under the right conditions rather than a recent, fragile invention. Beyond human origins, the very sciences that study our past would face a profound crisis of method. Geology, which uses stratified layers to date the past, would have to account for a human artifact in a stratum that should be sterile of such things. Archaeology would confront the uncomfortable reality that its models, built on consensus and the available evidence, had systematically filtered out data that did not fit. The Nampa figurine would become the ultimate case study in Thomas Kuhn's concept of a paradigm shift, demonstrating how a single, stubborn anomaly can eventually force a complete re-examination of the rules. It would argue for a more humble approach, one that leaves room for the possibility that our current story, no matter how well supported, is still incomplete. Finally, the artifact speaks to the fragility of our collective memory. If a society advanced enough to produce ceramics existed in North America 2 million years ago, what happened to it? The complete absence of any other trace suggests a cataclysm of unimaginable scale, or a slow fading so total that only one minuscule object survived. It raises the haunting possibility of deep cycles in human history, of rises and falls so ancient that all evidence, save for a few nearly indestructible clues, has been ground to dust by the relentless march of geological time. Our civilization, with its skyscrapers and satellites, might not be humanity's first great experiment, but merely its latest. The Nampa figurine, then, is more than a puzzle. It is a whisper from the abyss of time, suggesting that the story of intelligent life on Earth is far older, far stranger, and far more mysterious than our textbooks have ever dared to suggest. George Frederick Wright was a man living at a crossroads of ideas. His defense of the Nampa figurine was not an isolated act of rebellion, but the natural outcome of a career spent navigating the shifting ground between two emerging sciences, geology and archaeology, and his own deep personal convictions. To understand his role, we must see him in the full context of his time. He was a respected geologist, a man who read the story of the Earth in its layers of rock and sediment. Yet he was also a Protestant minister and a passionate advocate for a concept known as pre-Adamism. This was the idea that humans or human-like beings existed on Earth long before the biblical Adam, a theory some used to reconcile new geological evidence of deep time with scriptural tradition. For Wright, the Nampa figurine was not an attack on faith but a potential bridge. It could be empirical proof from the Idaho soil that humanity's roots stretched back into a vastly older, more complex past than anyone had yet accepted. His scientific mind saw the meticulous evidence from the well, the sand pump, the undisturbed clay. His theological framework had room for such a staggering discovery. This unique position made him the perfect and perhaps the only mainstream scholar willing to champion such an object. But this very blend of motivations would ultimately cast a long shadow over the figurine's credibility. In the decades that followed, as science professionalized and sought to sharply separate itself from religious interpretation, Wright's advocacy was reinterpreted. His careful geological work was often overshadowed by his theological associations. Critics could dismiss his conclusions not by refuting his field observations on the well, but by implying he was seeing what he wanted to see, that his desire to find evidence for pre-Adamite humans had clouded his scientific judgment. This perception, whether entirely fair or not, provided a convenient reason for later archaeologists to set his entire report aside. They could sidestep the challenging physical evidence by questioning the objectivity of its primary investigator. In this way, Wright's passionate defense became a double-edged sword. In the short term, it gave the figurine a hearing in serious academic journals, preserving its story and details for the future. In the long term, it allowed the next generation of scientists to file the artifact away not as a geological puzzle, but as a religious anomaly, a curious byproduct of a 19th century intellectual debate rather than a legitimate archaeological problem. Wright's legacy, then, is a poignant one. He was a meticulous observer caught between disciplines, whose greatest contribution to a mystery may have been to document it with such care that it could never be completely forgotten, even as the reasons he believed in it became the very reasons others chose to forget. So the Nampa figurine remains a tiny sentinel of contradiction. It is a physical object with a documented discovery story, yet it points toward a past that our established sciences say cannot exist. This is the heart of its enduring power. It does not offer easy answers, only a profound and unsettling question. The artifact sits precisely at the crossroads of three powerful forces: the hard, tactile evidence of the clay itself and the sand pump that retrieved it, the immovable facts of deep-time geology that date its surrounding layer, and the human instinct of scientific communities to protect the stories that give their work meaning and order. It is a case study in how we navigate the boundary between an unexplained fact and an unacceptable idea. What do we do with a piece of the puzzle that refuses to fit the picture on the box? Do we force it, break it, or set it aside and pretend it was never there? These unanswered historical mysteries, from the figurine in Idaho to other out-of-place artifacts around the globe, serve a vital purpose beyond mere curiosity. They are reminders that our understanding of history is not a finished book, but a manuscript we are constantly editing. They humble us. They suggest that the grand narrative of human existence may have prologues we have not yet found, chapters erased by time, or entire volumes written in a language we have forgotten how to read. They teach us that inquiry must always leave room for the unexpected, for the single, stubborn piece of evidence that might one day compel us to see the whole story anew. The Nampa figurine, resting quietly in its museum case, is an invitation to keep wondering, to stay open to the possibility that our past is deeper, stranger, and more mysterious than we have ever allowed ourselves to believe. What do you think? Does this artifact hint at a forgotten chapter, or is it simply a fascinating historical mistake? Share your perspective on this and other unresolved mysteries in the comments below.